Rosalind Bandy, Environmental Director of TLMI. I want to say good morning to everybody and welcome. The title of today's educational webinar is Labels that Support the Growth of Plastics Recycling. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Due to the large number of attendees, we're going to keep the lines muted. And you should see a box on the right side of your screen in which you can type your questions or your comments. Feel free to type those in during the presentation, and we will get to as many as possible at the end. Also want you to know that this webinar is going to be recorded and will be available on the TLMI member portal in case you want to share it with colleagues at a future time. I also want to let everybody know that we had promoted a label initiative for the environment webinar, and that has been postponed for a bit. So, okay, let's get started. You know, as more and more packaging engineers at brands and retailers are looking to create the most recyclable packaging they can, they're utilizing the APR design guide for plastics recyclability. In fact, TLMI has 7 converter and supplier member companies that have products on the market that have passed the design guide testing for either pressure sensitive or shrink labels. Hold on one second, advancing my slides. So today I'm pleased to introduce Jenny Brownell, who is a packaging engineer at Target, and John Standish, who is APR's technical director, to give you a couple of perspectives on plastics recyclability. Jenny will be talking about why labels that enable recyclability are important to Target, and John is going to talk about what it means to actually have a label that meets the APR design guide. So I'm going to start with you, Jenny, just to kind of give us an overview of Target's point of view, and then we'll go on to John.
Great, thank you. So I have been with Target for almost a year, but I also have an additional 10 years of industry experience working for a large food manufacturing CPG company. And so at Target, our packaging team consists of 6 different packaging engineers, and we support all of our own brand products. So within the food and essentials category. So we define it as anything that you put in or on your body. And our role is to work directly with all of our manufacturing partners, as well as our internal team, including buyers and sourcing, to ensure that the package meets not only the needs of our guests, but also has the structural integrity to get through supply chain, meets, you know, sustainability and recyclability goals, all while meeting our overall cost goals. In the fall of 2017 is when Target became a member of the APR, so not too long ago, and I'm excited to be the first retailer group to be an APR member. And I personally own energy in the relationship and the partnership between Target and the APR, but many people across Target are working with the APR, helping us meet many of our goals, which I'll talk to in just a minute. At Target here, we find the APR design guide to be a great asset and really our first stop when it comes to questions that we have around plastics recycling and the package formats that we're looking at. And we love how it continues to evolve and change as we learn more and have new ways to test packaging. Target is also a member of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, who owns the How to Recycle program, which we're actively involved in. From our perspective, we really see how these 2 organizations work together to move the industry in the right direction, and that's great to have that partnership and be able to all advance together. Sustainability is really important to our everyday at Target. We want to be a catalyst to make all packaging recyclable someday, and every little step helps get us there. We want we know that our guests want this and that the recycling industry needs this. And some statistics that I was able to find for you, we know that 94% of consumers expect to recycle, 90% of consumers think it's important to recycle, and 91% of consumers expect food and beverage brands to take action to increase the recyclability of their package. So this is huge for us. Our guests want it and they expect us to help get it there. And so Target has 5 public-facing sustainability goals that we work towards meeting each and every day. And I'll quickly go over those 5. So the first one is to source all of our own brand paper-based packaging from sustainably managed forests by 2022. Work to eliminate expanded polystyrene from our own brand packaging also by 2022. How we want to add the How to Recycle label to all of our own brand packaging across the entire store by 2020, where space allows. And then support the Recycling Partnership's mission to improve how more than 25% of the U.S. population recycles by 2020. And then lastly, create more demand for recycled packaging by creating 3 new end markets for recycled materials by 2020. So a lot of the work relating to labels, we kind of bucket under that third goal of adding the How to Recycle label to all of our own brand packaging by 2020. And we really take the stance that we want to tell our guests whether the package is or is not recyclable. We're not only putting the tile on things that are recyclable, we want to educate them because education is so important. And then we can also then track our evolution of where we've improved our packaging to make it recyclable, as we'll update those labels at that time. And as I said before, many people at Target are working with the APR and to help meet these goals, like the expanded polystyrene elimination, as well as creating more demand for recycled packaging. And our partnership with APR has been critical.
I'm sorry, Jenny, let me interrupt you. We've had a few questions.
Yeah.
People not seeing any slides. I should clarify, Jenny doesn't have slides. She's just speaking to this. And after Jenny's finished, we will go on to have a slide presentation by John from APR. Just a clarification.
Oh, thank you. Good call out. Okay, so at Target, we want our packaging to be best in class, and one of the initiatives that we're really interested in and really trying to dig deep on is these APR recognized labels, specifically for PET packaging. It's been one we've been focusing on. We really do see this as an industry win, and we choose to partner with our vendors on getting us towards this. And we're not necessarily asking for exclusivity in any of these instances, as we want to kind of better the industry together. And I do have one exciting announcement to share that we actually just had our very first own brand APR recognized label product. It's just rolling into market. And it is our Market Pantry Cheese Balls package, and it has a wash-off adhesive label. So check that out next time you're in the Target store. We also do have numerous other initiatives in the works. And then part of each and every new project that we kick off, which is many a year, hundreds of them, we are asking for our vendors to reference the design guide and reference, all of the things that we're looking for when it comes to labels and just recyclability of our packaging in general. So with our couple months of digging into this, the APR recognized labels for our packaging, we've definitely hit our headwinds, and which I'm going to briefly explain next, and then we'll love to tell you how you can help. So Target, just to kind of frame it up, Target doesn't buy packaging materials directly. We use co-manufacturers and vendor partners who buy the labels for their entire operation. We're often presented with a couple package formats and label options, but often we're not customizing. So I think that's a good kind of laying the framework of how Target is operating today. Our manufacturing partners may run our products along with many other labels and brands and products, and they may have a high volume label purchase today, which drives low cost for them. So that's one of our usually first steps, is to start with a costing exercise, and we're really encouraging these partners to cost it across all of the items they produce and not just Target, to really try to kind of help get the whole industry moving in the right direction and not just for Target. We're also learning that our partners are just unaware of the challenges with recycling, as many people are. They're not unwilling to partner or help. They don't know, they're not educated. So that's where we would love that's why we're glad you're here and learning more with us. And that's how we think that you can help bring everything you're learning now to your customers and your clients. Share with them the challenges, share with them the design guide, and what retailers like Target and other brands are looking for. Bring them kind of a package solution of things that have already been tested and kind of true wins. And because what we're learning is awareness can help drive acceptance and change, which will bring a win to all of us in the entire industry. So that's what I've prepared right now. So I'll hand it over to John to continue, and then I'll also be kind of speaking where it applies throughout his presentation as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for participating in the webinar this morning. Roz, if you could advance the slides. And again, let's just go on to the next. There's a variety of PET packages in the market today that employ pressure-sensitive labels. And PET is valued for its low color, its clarity, and the pressure-sensitive labels provide a lot of marketing benefit to PET packages. And as you all on the call probably know, there are film pressure-sensitive labels and there are paper pressure-sensitive labels. Some packages use one or the other. Something like dish soap bottles actually have a film label on the front panel and a paper label on the back. I'm going to be focusing most of my comments today on film labels, but the things that we're going to learn about film labels can be extended in the weeks and months to come to paper labels. So going forward, the bottom line that I want to share with everybody today, if you could advance the slide, there we go. There we go, perfect. The bottom line that I wanted to share with everybody today, and I want to be quite frank about it, is pressure-sensitive labels, the inks and the adhesives, can all be a primary source of contamination when PET containers are recycled. And Avery Dennison and UPM Raflatac are two leading companies that develop and supply pressure-sensitive film labels. They now offer pressure-sensitive film labels that are APR recognized. And this means that they've passed a rigorous set of laboratory tests that demonstrate that these films are compatible with PET recycling processes. And what I'd like to challenge us all to do today is work together to set the performance that these labels provide the industry as the standard for PET packaging going forward. And looking at the next slide, we can move forward in this direction with a lot of confidence, because here are 4 fairly high volume examples of PET packaging that now commercially employ pressure-sensitive labels that are APR recognized and provide this new level of recycle compatibility performance. So in the water segment, PepsiCo's Life Water and Coca-Cola's Smart Water employ the label capability that we're talking about today in being compatible with recycling. And in the juice segment, Tropicana from PepsiCo and Simply Juice from Coca-Cola are now both commercial and for some time now, at least a year, using this new pressure-sensitive film label capability. So in the next slide, what I'm going to do through the balance of the discussion, just give you a brief introduction to the APR, illustrate that the problems that untested labels can cause in recycling and illustrate the benefits of using the new label capability. And I'm going to provide what I'm going to call a model specification for pressure-sensitive labels that companies such as Target can use to call out the level of label performance that they want in future projects. And I'm going to describe briefly the APR tests, suggest some next steps, and one of the most important things I want to do before we end today is invite feedback from the TLMI members so that this work going forward is a benefit to all of us in the value chain. So in the next slide, the APR is a trade association, not so different from TLMI, but we represent the companies that are engaged in plastics recycling. And our goals are to increase the supply of plastics that are available for recycling, eliminate contamination that reduces the quality of recycled plastics and impacts the productivity of the recycling process. And then we want to increase the demand for recycled plastics because in every company, the more recycled plastic that they can use, that's one of the biggest things that they can do to improve the sustainability of their packaging. And the next slide shows just a sampling of APR members. There's companies there that are, again, companies that actually recycle plastics or companies that make plastic bottles and closures. You'll see UPM, Avery Dennison, Multicolor are companies that are well known in the label industry. You'll also see a number of leading global brand companies. So leading global brand companies participate at APR because we've all seen how there's a tremendous amount of activity involved at brand companies to make sure that their packages are compatible with recycling processes and that their packages contain the highest amount of post-consumer plastic recycle content. And because we're a very engineering and operations-oriented group at APR, brand companies participate at APR to get that engineering and operational understanding of how their packages influence recycling. At APR, as Jenny and Roz mentioned, our signature document is the APR Design Guide for Plastics Recyclability. You can find this on the APR website, which is plasticsrecycling.org, O-R-G. And in the design guide, we have a description of how all the different packaging features, not just the label, but closures, attachments, layers, coatings, impact how a package is compatible or not with recycling. And we offer test methods that packaging developers can use so that in the laboratory they can confirm that their package is compatible with recycling. And one of our group of test methods is called critical guidance test methods. This is a comprehensive laboratory simulation of the PET recycling process. And for people who develop products that meet the criteria of critical guidance testing, APR has a recognition program. And we recognize that products have been developed to meet those test criteria, and companies can use this APR recognition program as part of their marketing to brand companies to enhance the value of their products for recyclability and sustainability. And so in the next slide, what I want to give you just a little overview of how PET bottles are recycled. In the United States today, the predominant way that we recycle materials is called single stream recycling. And so most of you know from just at home today, most of us put plastic bottles, metal cans, paper, glass, all go into the recycle cart and get mixed together. And a truck comes along and picks up all our recycled materials and takes the materials off to a place called a MRF, MRF, which stands for Material Recovery Facility. And at the MRF, all the individual materials in the recycle bin get sorted out into piles. This is done manually by people, by machinery, and by optical sorters. And believe it or not, today robots are now being used to sort the recycle stream. And all the different materials get sorted into a pile and stored in a bunker. And the individual materials are then collected by compressing them into bales. And these bales are like giant bales of hay, except in the case of PET bottles, they weigh about 1,300 to 1,500 pounds. And so in the lower left of this slide, you can see a picture of a bale of PET bottles. You can see the baling wires if you look carefully. And in those bales of bottles, the bottles still have the labels. And if we replace the closure on the bottles still have the closures. And the next slide shows just a stack of bales out in a storage yard. Again, these weigh about 1,300, 1,500 pounds apiece. They're baled up so that they're as dense as can be for efficient shipping. But the raw materials for PET recycling are these bales. And so the labels, because every package is sold with a label, get mixed in with the PET and can impact the recycling process. So the next slide points out that when those bales go to a recycler, those bales get broken open, the bales get ground up in a giant granulator into little pieces of plastic that we call flake, and I'll have a picture of that in a minute. But all of that flake with the labels, with the closures, gets washed in hot water at 85 degrees centigrade that contains 1% sodium hydroxide. So we call this a hot caustic wash. And the crux of the matter is when you have a pressure sensitive label in this hot caustic wash, does the label and the adhesive separate from the PET? And what's the impact of that hot caustic wash on the ink? So just to get ready for what's coming up. There's then a rinse step. There's a float and sink step. PET normally sinks in water. Polyethylene or polypropylene used for labels normally floats in water. And that's a very simple way to get a separation of label from PET. So that float sink's important. And then the PET, after being washed, is melt processed at 285 degrees centigrade. And so if there's residual resin on the PET from an adhesive or from the polymer binders used in ink, those polymer binders will thermally degrade at that processing temperature to create a yellow brownish color in the PET. So it's critical that we separate the ink resins and adhesives from the PET. In the next slide, on the upper right is a picture of what flake looks like. It's just little pieces of the plastic bottles all ground up. And in the lower right, these are samples of wash water taken after bottles with different labels have been washed in that hot caustic wash I mentioned. The bottle in the front, in the right, is what unused wash water looks like. It's kind of got a milky appearance because of the surfactants dispersed in the water. But all the others are taken after labels have been washed. And the bright red, blue, and yellow color in those wash waters are the inks that have come off the label and are dispersed in the wash water. And so it's very undesirable to have inks from labels dispersed in the wash water. PET can be recycled back into new bottles. Shaw Carpet or Mohawk Carpet, two leading carpet brands, own their own recycling facilities and use recycled PET to make carpet. On the lower right is called a PET thermoform. These are made from recycled PET bottles, and you commonly see these when you buy a salad or in the bakery section. And then in the upper right are bobbins of fiber. A company called Unify makes textile fibers out of recycled PET, and these go back into very upscale products sold by companies like North Face, Patagonia, or Nike. And so dark color, yellow color, or haze from contamination in the PET reduces the value of the recycled PET and can in fact prevent recycled PET from being used in these demanding next use applications. So the next slide, just another illustration. On the left is the label panel that normally would show all the ingredients in a beverage. And just after a brief exposure to that hot caustic wash, you can see that the ink is attacked by the hot caustic wash solution and it starts to come off. And on the right, here's a plastic film, pressure sensitive label with brownish ink. And after you wash that up, you can see all the brownish colored ink in the wash water in a laboratory test. In the next slide, on the left, in this picture, sample number 1 is the Simply Juice label that represents, that's an example of the new label capability we want to have. And so if you take the label panel from a Simply Juice bottle and cut it up into pieces and expose it to that hot caustic wash, what results at the bottom are pieces of clear PET flake, just what we want. And at the top in the yellowish color is the label. The adhesive is still attached to the label. The ink is still attached to the label as legible as if it was just printed. And that label floats in water, that PET sinks in water, and we get a perfect separation of the label from the PET. In contrast, on the right is a pressure sensitive label that has a lot of blue ink in it. This is a commercial product, many of you would know. And what you see on the bottom is a lot of the label still adheres to the PET. The adhesive was formulated for that label to adhere and never come off. The blue ink has largely washed off, and what you see in the middle is the pieces of PET that have been stained blue by the ink that was in the wash water, and that's all highly undesirable. In the next slide, I'm just emphasizing PET has high density sinks. Polyethylene and polypropylene normally have low density and float in water. In the photograph on the right, you can see an injection molded plaque that is standard PET. It's clear, colorless, very transparent. On the left is that if there's ink that is impacting the PET, those molded plaques often have a yellowish brownish appearance because of the ink that's contaminating the PET. If the label, polyethylene or polypropylene label, doesn't float, if it's still adhering to the PET and sinks with the PET, the molded plaque on the right that has a milky appearance is milky because it has polyethylene and polypropylene mixed in with it. And so you get a very milky appearance. Just 3 more examples on the upper left. Here's a pressure sensitive label. You can see some of the pieces floating in water, but some of the pieces of the label are sinking in water. This is because there's a lot of white ink on the label, and that the high density of titanium dioxide and the white ink causes the label to be, even though the polymer film is low in density, the overall density of the printed label, it sinks. In the middle, where I have sample 1 and 4. This is an example where the label separated from the PET in sample 4, but the adhesive did not. And so when you put the label or the washed flake into an oven and heat it to simulate what happens when PET is recycled, that yellow color in sample 4 results from adhesive that did not wash off the PET. And then the upper right, we'll talk another day if you like about paper labels, but I just wanted to illustrate that paper labels, when they're introduced into that hot caustic wash, turn into pulp again, and the paper fibers are more dense than water, so they sink in water, and they're very difficult to rinse and filter out of the wash water. And so there's an illustration of why paper-based pressure-sensitive labels are a problem for PET recyclers. In the next slide, this shows the model film label specification that APR has drafted. And I want to emphasize to everybody on the call today that this is a draft. I maybe should have written that on the slide, but this is a draft. We have a technical committee at APR, and we'll be reviewing this model specification at our upcoming meeting in June. And I actually hope that the committee approves this in June. But the reason I stressed I wanted feedback from the TLMI membership is, there's a good opportunity still to shape this and improve this to everyone's benefit. But and this is a model specification that people that work at companies like Target that are in package engineering groups might use to call out label performance. So people that are in packaging engineering positions, they have to know a lot of stuff, so they aren't necessarily experts in labels, or they aren't necessarily experts in plastics recycling. And so the idea is, here's a model specification that can be used to confirm to someone submitting a label or a third party developing a package that they can use to make sure that the label providing the right recycle performance is delivered. And option 1, I've called industry best practice for printed labels. And this would be where the film pressure sensitive label with all the printing ink on it meets the guidance criteria of our APR critical guidance test method for floating film labels. And option 2 would be a minimum where the unprinted film pressure sensitive label meets the guidance criteria of our floating labels test, and 2 screening tests have been done. And these are screening tests that might be done by the label converters, because they're fairly easy to do, and I'll show you. One is just to confirm that the label, when printed, still floats in water. And the other is to expose the printed label to that hot caustic wash solution to make sure that the hot caustic wash solution does not attack the printed label. And so in the next slide.
Hey, John, I just want to interrupt for a second.
Sure.
This actual model specification, as I understand it, and maybe Jenny, you can chime in, was the result of your work with Target. Is that correct?
Well, that's where the idea came up, because again, I'm just excited as could be that Target has now actually developed one of their own products with this new label capability. But that's where the thinking about this model label specification came about, is because the engineer that we were working with at Target at the time, just commented that each individual packaging engineer at Target handles several projects at a time, and again, needed an easy way to call out to their supply chain label performance that they needed. And this is the idea that came up.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said earlier, this is what now we wanted to prove we can, share with our vendors. And then, as John said, any work that could be done in advance to know that the label material passes these screening tests, all of that helps us bring it forward that much faster in the market.
Yeah, and we call it a model specification because as a trade association, trade associations can't make specifications and we can't tell buyers and sellers what to do. But we can offer a model for discussion. So that's why I'm very careful about using the word, this is a model specification. There's a trade industry reason for that the TLMI folks and APR folks have to respect. The tests involved are, again, our critical guidance test is a comprehensive simulation of the PET recycling process. And this is actually done by an independent third-party laboratory. And frankly has a certain expense associated with it. So there are applications where a brand company might ask that the printed label be tested for critical guidance recognition. So in the case of those Coke and Pepsi examples that I showed you earlier, Coke and Pepsi asked that those labels be tested fully printed against this critical guidance test. And that's how that was done. But for smaller programs, I understand that it might not always be possible to do that critical guidance testing. So in the case of the unprinted label, Avery Dennison and UPM Raflatech have already done that testing for the supply chain. So simply by referencing the product designation from Avery Dennison or UPM, we can be certain that the label meets the critical guidance criteria for the unprinted label. The label float screen test is simply take a beaker of water or a glass of water, a bowl of water, anything, cut a printed label up into about 1 centimeter squares, and mix them into the water and observe do they float or sink. If they all float, that's good. If any of the label pieces sink because the ink density is high, that would be undesirable for recycling. And that's a simple test that could be done in any workplace. The bleeding ink screen is a little bit more complex. And in the next slide, the way that one would do this in the laboratory is you'd have a hot plate and a beaker, so you could heat up a 1% solution of sodium hydroxide with a surfactant to 85 degrees centigrade. So you'd need a hot plate, a beaker, you'd have to be a scale to make up that solution, and a thermocouple or a thermometer to test the water temperature. The best mixer is an overhead mixer, but for those of you that have worked in the laboratory, a little magnetic mixer to keep things moving would also get the job done. And the next slide illustrates this bleeding ink evaluation. These are labels taken from 3 different, these are not pressure sensitive labels, I should emphasize that. These are wraparound labels that are used on single serve water bottles. And on the bottom is the original label. And on the top are labels that have been exposed to hot caustic wash water for 15 minutes. And the 2 labels on the right went into the caustic wash water and came out looking like new. So again, I have no knowledge what specific inks were used there, or whether these might have laminates. I frankly don't know how these labels were printed and done, but the test clearly shows that these inks remain with excellent integrity after being exposed to the hot caustic wash water. The label on the far left, 100% of the ink washed off the label and went into the wash water. And in my experience, the result of this bleeding ink test is almost, well, in my experience, it's always either you get excellent performance as illustrated on the right, or you get terrible performance with ink adhesion as evidenced by the sample on the left. And in the next slide, just some next steps coming up. We want to complete this film pressure sensitive label model specification at APR this summer. And again, would like to invite input from the TLMI membership. We'd like to emphasize the opportunity for APR to cooperate with TLMI and the SPC, how to recycle label. So if you're on the call today and you're not familiar with the How to Recycle Label program, here's the website for that. You might actually be getting requests for this How to Recycle Label information to be incorporated into one of your printing projects. And it's a way that the How to Recycle Label group at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition can confirm back to companies like Target that they're using the right label technology.
And I'll chime in here just for our TLMI members. I do have an educational webinar in the works with the How to Recycle Label folks at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, so stay tuned for that one. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's great, Roz. And then what we'd like to do again later this summer is extend this work with the film pressure sensitive labels to to develop labels for shrink sleeve labels and to paper pressure sensitive labels. And again, a credit to UPM and Avery is that they have already developed paper labels, which because of selection of adhesive, the paper, and the inks, they've demonstrated that there's terrible paper pressure sensitive labels for recycling, and then there's better paper pressure sensitive labels. So we want to extend this work to the both shrink sleeve and paper pressure sensitive labels as well. And I think the last slide is I welcome feedback and for more information. There's the APR website. Please feel free to send an email to me or to contact Rosalind Bandy at TLMI for more information. And if you'd like to attend an APR meeting, here's some upcoming APR meeting dates. And I mentioned our design guide training program. This is where we actually can come to a work location and provide training on the APR design guide. And so maybe there's some way at TLMI to put together a training program that could be the better part of a day training on plastics recycling and the impact of labels on recycling. So that's an option for the future. So thank you very much again for participating today.
Okay, so just a final comment, the APR design guide training, we've got feelers out on that one for possibly a future print think or specialized regional technical meeting. So stay tuned for that. So now I'd like to open it up for some of the questions. We've received some while the webinar was going on, and I'm just going to kind of run through these. John, a question for you is, can PET flake be recycled indefinitely? So if a container is, say, made of 100% recycled content, can that continue to be recycled?
A short answer is yes, but and there are examples of PET containers in the marketplace today that are made with 100% recycled PET. One that we all would know is the naked juice bottle from PepsiCo. That's one that's publicly known and I could point to. And that's our goal in the circular economy, is that materials get recycled over and over again. But for that to happen in a practical way, two things have to happen. One is we do need to eliminate the contamination that goes into PET recycling, because the increase in contamination from inks, labels, and other sources over time would cause the PET to be, become a little bit yellow and dark, which is undesirable. But we also need to get recycling rates up from today's about 30% for PET to a much higher number for that to be a practical thing, because today, if there's 100 PET bottles, only 30 of them that go out into the market, only 30 get collected for recycling. So in the next round, they're diluted with virgin resin.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Here's a question for Jenny. Jenny, can you say which CPG product is launching with the wash-off adhesive at Target? Is that something that you can say at this point?
Yeah, it's Market Pantry cheese balls. So it's a big, giant snack container with a screw cap.
Great. Well, keep a lookout for that.
And with that too, we also had a label substrate change, which actually improved the look of the label on shelf. It improved operational, the ability for the vendor to run the label, and even saw some efficiencies there. So definitely a huge win for us and our vendor for that one, and the recycling industry.
Yep. So here's a question about linerless pressure sensitive labels, and John, I'm not sure if APR's come across this, but those linerless PS labels are often used for packaged food products such as clamshells, thermoforms. Is there an implication of the presence of silicone release coatings on these labels for recycling? Do you have a have you come across silicone as an issue in the testing, or does the testing incorporate silicone as part of the design guide at this point?
Oh, I think I would say, Roz, that's just an excellent reason why I hope APR and TLMI can continue to collaborate going forward. Silicones are often used as what are called denesting agents for PET thermoforms. And so silicones are present when PET is recycled. And we know that they're not, they don't dissolve into PET, and they're at large amounts, they're a source of haze. At small amounts, it wouldn't be a problem. So I think the answer to that question is one of those "it all depends" kind of questions. And this is the first time anybody's ever asked that question. So it would need some investigation.
See what you get for hanging out with label converters? Okay, here's another question for, I think, you, John, about the recyclers. How do recyclers know if a PET container is actually using the APR, let's call it approved material, although I don't know if that's the term you use. from one of the suppliers that you mentioned. And what if it's a small brand? It's not a Coke or a Pepsi gigantic product, but what if it's a smaller brand that's, you know, relatively uncommon? How would the recycler know that that's a good label?
Oh, again, that's a good and fair question. I'm going to start out by saying, in the case of the higher volume bottles, reclaimers know every single one. And they'll actually, when they know about a bad bottle, they know about them and they'll actually pull them off the line. And many PET reclaimers have a little laboratory set up. Remember that beaker on a hot plate with a mixer and those little samples I showed where the label came off or didn't? Most PET reclaimers have a little laboratory where they can test labels and confirm which ones stay on and which ones wash off readily. And so for the bigger brands, they're going to know that. But again, to be honest and transparent about everything, they don't have time to test every brand in the marketplace. And so some of the smaller brands, when they're troublesome, just go into the recycle stream, and you know, the adhesive in the ink causes an increment of problem and it flies under the radar screen. But in the aggregate, those are all problems. So again, our goal is to lift the whole industry up to this new standard. And as Jenny was saying, this make it a win-win for everybody to do so, because not only are the labels recyclable, they might provide some other benefits that make them desirable, and they're cost effective. So why not move in this new direction?
Good point. And I know that we really didn't talk about full bottle shrink sleeves in this presentation, and those, you know, from my long time affiliation with APR, I know that shrink sleeve, full bottle shrink sleeves anyway, are with a few exceptions, are kind of a recycler's nightmare. Is it still kind of the practice of most PET recyclers to remove shrink sleeve covered PET containers from the recycling stream, or has that changed?
Oh, there's been, again, we could have we have lots of subjects for webinars of the future. Yes, I think we can say that all PET recyclers have taken steps to manage the impact of shrink sleeve labels. And the steps involve buying new equipment that, of course, involves capital expense and depreciation and maintenance expense, floor space utilization, more maintenance. So in being able to manage the impact of shrink sleeve labels, they're doing it, but at added expense to the recycling process. There are some new label technologies that are in the marketplace that have APR recognition, or the de-seaming technology that Sun Chemicals has demonstrated has what's called APR responsible, has gone through the APR responsible innovation program and actually been tested at full production scale. So there's new technologies, and we would encourage anybody on the call today that's working in the shrink sleeve label area to be evaluating and implementing these new technologies for shrink sleeve labels.
Great, thank you.
And comment on that from the brand side is, you know, as I said, we're putting the How to Recycle label on all of our own brand packaging, and so what we do in most instances with shrink sleeve labels, per guidance from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, is we tell our guests to remove that shrink sleeve label as well in advance of recycling it.
And so the how to recycle label on that shrink sleeved container actually says, if you want to recycle this, remove the shrink sleeve.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to do two more questions. John, has any testing been conducted on recycling metallized PET filmic labels?
Oh, I'm glad somebody asked that, because that's very important. Something that I find fascinating and many people find surprising is that when you have a vacuum deposited metal layer on a plastic film, even though it's such a thin layer of metal, if there's enough surface area, that metallized layer could have a negative impact on what are called near-infrared sorters. Also, that metallized film can trigger a metal detector and cause the bottle to be sorted out. So APR has developed a near-infrared sorting potential test that can be used to make sure that labels that cover a substantial percentage of a bottle don't interfere with near-infrared sorting. And APR has also developed a metals sortation test where bottles can be passed through a metal detector to make sure that they're not being ejected by the metal detector. And work has been done there. I'm not prepared to talk about that publicly because I'm not sure what's available to be talked about publicly there, but I know there's work that's been done. And so if somebody offline wanted to learn more about that, maybe contact Roz or I, and we could talk about that more offline. But those tests exist, and if somebody is interested, that would be a way to approach it.
Okay, folks, we are at the 60-minute point. I want to thank everyone for joining. If you have follow-up questions, please send them to me at my TLMI email, and I will try and get those answers for you. Thank you to our guests, Jenny and John, and thank you to everyone who attended. I hope that this helped with your understanding of recyclability and label issues. Bye for now, everybody.